All right. I'm going to do a little bit of housekeeping and then we're getting into it with the Coreys, which I cannot wait. This Thursday, we have a top advisor office hours with John Barrows. John has a mere 405,000 LinkedIn followers, and he has that for a reason. He runs one of the most successful sales training companies out there. They train Google and Salesforce and LinkedIn and you name it. John is an absolute expert in the world of sales. His last office hours, I mean, people could not write fast enough in terms of like some of the stuff he was saying, like check this out, check that out. It was unbelievable. So looking forward to having John back for his office hours to talk sales on Thursday. On Friday, we have a special event with Dominique Wilkins. Dominique Wilkins is, probably one of the top 50 basketball players of all time, like the equivalent of the, Michael Jordan, Magic Johnson, Larry Birds of the world. Absolute legend, phenomenal guy. He's going to be joining us. That's a shorter one. It's only a half an hour. We'll see if we can get in any Q&A, but I'm excited to bring Neek in on Friday. And then on Tuesday, we have a power hour with the one and only Robin Engelson, and she's going to be talking about her new book, which comes out in 14 days, called Exhausted to Energized. And I love the way that you've been promoting the book, and I'm just excited for you to, be able to talk to the community about it. So super excited. Anyway, we are here today. Actually, for anyone who's new, like Christy, our format is like a 30-30 format. So 30-minute fireside chat, me asking the Coreys all kinds of questions, and then we open it up for a live Q&A. So if you have a question for them, you just put in the chat, hey, I've got a question, and then I will get teed up and you can ask your question directly to either Deb or Ken. So incredibly excited to have Deb and Ken Corey with us today. So many moons ago, and I say it was 100 years ago, we featured Debra's book called Build It, a Rebel's Play Guide for world-class employee engagement. And we had such a good time. We're like, we got to bring these guys back. Luckily, they wrote another absolutely stellar book that we're going to talk about today, which is Bad Bosses Ruin Lives, the building blocks for being a great boss. So I'm super, super excited about that. Before we get into it with them, Kathy, get us started. Big thank you to Mike Perlow. Debra, what do Ken, you haven't seen our intro yet, but Deb, we didn't have this back in the day. What are your thoughts?
Wow, amazing. I feel honored just to have our picture there. I was going to start, I expected everyone to dance though.
Well, we dance after. We got a little dance party at the end. if that's what you would like us to do.
Brilliant. Yeah, as I say in England, brilliant.
I know you got it. So how does a guy from North Texas and a woman from Pennsylvania wind up in England? How'd you guys wind up in England?
I just want to say the last 27 years have all been Deb's fault. I followed her as the trailing spouse. So when we went through cultural training back in the day, they told me about things like the WI, the Women's Initiative, and no, the Women's Institute,
Winston,
and yeah, and knitting circles and stuff like that. So for 27 years, I've been following her.
I don't blame you.
Yeah, my company, I worked for Gap, and they asked me to come over to London for a 2-year expat assignment, and we haven't left. There you go.
So I am dying to know the backstory of how did you guys decide to collaborate on this book? Obviously, bad bosses, we hear about them all the time. We hear about toxic cultures, and we hear about people leave their job not because of the company, but because of the person that they directly report to. So obviously, it's very, very topical. But how did you guys decide to collaborate and put this book out into the world?
So I'll kick us off. So it's funny that you held up the book Build It, because when I was writing Build It with my boss at the time, I was telling him a story about a bad boss that I had. And I said the phrase, bad bosses ruin lives. And the phrase just caught on. We put it on t-shirts, we put it on babies' onesies, we put it on stickers. Everyone absolutely could relate to it and resonate with it. And I always said I was going to write another book based off of that. So zoom ahead, 6 years later, and I finally got around to writing the book. And Ken and I would be walking our dogs, and I'd be talking about what I was thinking of doing for the book. And all of a sudden it hit me, why don't I write the book with Ken? Because every time I have an idea as an HR leader, Ken has an idea as an engineering leader. So Ken, why did you agree to say yes? That was a crazy decision. Writing a book with your spouse.
It was a fairly crazy decision, but I have to say it's been incredibly cathartic as well. We've been through an awful lot together in our years together, but we've also been through a lot in our professional lives, and so getting a chance to explore this stuff with my wife was a real journey of fire. Actually, I had to admit stuff to her about my professional life I might never have admitted. I would never have admitted that I have been a bad boss in the past. So yeah, this was quite the exploration.
So we're going to get into that. So the good news is bad bosses can be reclamated.
Absolutely.
That's an interesting topic. One thing, we have a lot of authors on here. We have a lot of people that are thinking of writing a book. And so this is not really on the subject. It's more on the format of the book. One of the things I think you guys did exceptionally well is the format of the book. It's like every chapter, exactly what you're getting. You just structured it in a very formulaic way that I think made it really easy to know and digest all of the information. Just the format I thought was brilliant, really, really well done. Because other books, like you might read something good, but you're like, I got another 250 pages to go through, and I'm not really sure what I'm going to get. Like I knew what I was going to get as I kept going through the book because you kept that very consistent format. How did you come up with that? I'm curious.
I'm only smiling because Ken knows that I love mysteries, absolutely love mysteries, but I'm rubbish at a really long murder mystery because I just want to know what's going to happen at the end. I'm not a very patient person. And a lot of people, this is my sixth book, and a lot of people who read my books say that they like the way that I write, and now Ken and I write similarly because they just want to see it. They want to be able to figure out what's most relevant so they can go in and out to it, that they know the high level topic, So I'm just laughing because it's written for people like me who have a very short attention span and want to know exactly what we're getting. So Ken, your thoughts on that as well?
My thoughts are, well, Scott, you've seen Deb's previous book about Build It, and one of the highlights of it was that it's easy to dip into and come out of. You don't have to read it front to back. You can read in the middle and then go to the end and then go to the beginning. And because of the nature of the subject we're working with here, with the 10 bad bosses, the 14 kinds of building blocks that we wanted to talk about, it had to be in that kind of random access. It couldn't be a really thick tome, if you see what I mean.
Yeah. I think it's so important because I mean, honestly, I think people that say, oh, I've read all these books and they've read them page 1 to page, I'm not sure I believe them. I'm a dipper, so I love books where I can kind of dip in and out and take away what I want to take away. And so anyway, I thought the format was phenomenal.
Can I
But
add one thing, Scott? Only because you
please.
said there's so many authors. Since we're amongst friends, I'm gonna be really honest and vulnerable here and tell you guys that, we were really proud of the book, but we learned a really important lesson because we just recorded the book, the audio version. And what we learned is that we should have read the book out loud to each other before we printed it. Because as we were doing the audio book, we're like, maybe we should have done. There was only maybe 5 or 6 times we did that.
Yep.
It was a really, really good exercise. So if you're writing a book, I highly recommend pretend you're recording it because it'll help you think through the structure and the flow a lot.
That's good advice. Really, very, very good advice. So let's get into, there's 10 types of quote unquote bad bosses, or 10 categories that you guys have defined. And I was curious, I mean, obviously I love it. I love it. You put them on. I don't know if those are stickers or what, but they're cool. Obviously, I'd love to spend time on all of them, which we can't do. So let's talk about which one do you find is the most prevalent? And then which one is the most damaging? Like the one where, oh my God, if your boss is this type, like run for the hills.
Go ahead, Ken. What the great thing about doing this together is Ken and I are going to have different answers, which I love.
Yeah, I love.
Go for it, Ken.
I would say it depends on your point of view. We did 2 surveys in the research of the book. From the employee standpoint, the unappreciator is the #1 boss that's out there. That's the #1 reported kind of boss that we identified. From the boss's point of view, what was the #1? Deb, was it the firefighter?
It was the pretender.
The pretender, you're right,
Yeah.
you're right. So context is really, really important. Am I talking about me or am I talking about all bad bosses, right? And then as far as most damaging, my take on that is the unappreciator is the most damaging, because the unappreciator is the boss that never says thank you. You get a paycheck, what more do you want? Right? And it leads to all sorts of really negative lessons that employees will take with them. It causes all sorts of secondary and tertiary effects on the organization. So that's where I'd put my money. Deb, what about you?
Yeah, well, we did a survey, and if anybody's curious, it's on our website. So the unappreciator was the top one, 81%, which was really, really frustrating because the book I wrote before this was on appreciation. It's like, okay, just read the book. Micromanager was second at 80%, which didn't surprise me. I mean, I am a recovering micromanager. And then the third one was the avoider at 80%. The one thing I'd say is every single type of 10 types of bad bosses all had more than 50% of people said that they've had at least one, if not all of these types of bad bosses. So they're all out there, and normally you have more than one. Answering Ken's question, it's sort of like kids. I don't have a favorite as far as most damaging. And the reason I would say is if I asked all of you what was the most important thing for you to get from your boss, we'd all have different answers. So for Ken, probably it's appreciation, since he said the unappreciator. For someone else, if maybe I'm focused on getting to the next level, the blocker might be the worst kind of bad boss because they're getting in my way of being promoted. So I do think it depends on, we're all different. What is it that we want and need from our people the most? But to some extent, we all need all of them. And if we get them really, really bad, then that's when the damage is going to happen. One thing I did want to say just at the beginning is this book was not actually written for horrible bosses. It was written for people like us who just want to be better. We know that we're human managing humans. We're going to make a mistake. Why don't we just read about it so we can do something about it?
Did you find? Oh, go ahead, Ken.
I do apologize, Scott. I wanted to add one more thing. In the book, we highlight the point that everybody has all of these kinds of bad boss behaviors in given circumstances. Mm-hmm. So just because I might admit that I've been a coercer back in the day, that doesn't let me off the hook for being a firefighter or any of the other kinds of bad bosses.
In your research, did you guys find that there were generational differences in terms of how people viewed bosses? In terms of like one generation feeling like they were more underappreciated or anything like that?
We hoped that we were going to find that we did ask how long you've been in the workplace. And we hoped that we would find that things were getting better, first of all, that people new to the workplace wouldn't have had a bad boss. But every single person, unfortunately, 99.6% of people who participated in the global survey has had a bad boss. We didn't really see trends, I have to say. I kept looking, like every day I'd look and see if things were changing based off of the country or the years in the job. And it was unfortunately pretty darn consistent.
It's interesting. What do you think we can learn from bad bosses? I became a sales leader very, very early in my career, and I had a string of bad bosses and before I took my first leadership role. And I learned so much from them of really what not to do and what didn't work. And I don't know, maybe it's just my mindset. Like I have a glass half full kind of mindset. So I'm like, I actually am pretty grateful for those bad bosses because I realized, boy, if I do things this way, basically the opposite, it should have a pretty tremendous effect. And it did. It wasn't rocket science. Is there anything else you think we can learn from bad bosses?
Go ahead, Deb.
Oh, sorry. I think for me, and I'm a glass half full kind of person also, I think that we can learn that actually, I used the word unintentional before, that we need to really understand that either for ourselves or our bosses, that most of the time we're not doing it on purpose. That most of the time we don't intentionally say we're going to be an unappreciator. We probably either we don't have the skills, we don't have the time, whatever it is. So I think to some extent we need to cut people some slack, and also just be open with our people. And I'm going to share a silly story that we write in the book to bring this to life. So one of the stories, and there's many in the book of when Ken and I got it wrong, is that we had just moved from from San Francisco to London. And I was a boss for a new team. They were all British. I was American. Yes, we had been to cultural training, but I didn't really know much about Brits. And about 3 months into the job, I thought I was doing a brilliant job. I thought I was being a great boss. Everybody seemed happy. We were having a great time. We were getting things done. And then a very brave employee pulled me aside and said, Deb, I want you to know we have a Debra Corey support group that meets every Friday. And we share stories of how you had upset us and made us cry during the week. And I share that because, first of all, I thought I was doing a great job. So I was naive about the situation. And also I wasn't doing it intentionally. And that was a real aha moment for me that, you know what, I need to be closer to my people. I need to understand what I'm doing well and what I'm not doing well.
Absolutely. And I wanted to add to that. We find it easy to point at a bad boss. That person over there is a blamer. That person over there is a blocker. Oh, that person's just a bad boss in general. we find it easy to point a finger and put a person in a box or whatever. But when crunch time hits and we get promoted to be managers ourselves and we don't get any training, we don't get any support, we don't get any leadership or discussions or mentors or any of that, we're just thrown into it and said, hey, okay, now you were such a good individual performer, now you're going to be a boss. Good luck to you, you know.
Or you did a good job in the US, now manage a bunch of Brits.
Absolutely.
Like I'm going to know what the hell I'm doing. Yeah, go for it.
we're going to fall back on learned behavior. The fact that you went through that thought process, Scott, and said, oh, I don't want to do that. You're streets ahead of where I was when I was an initial manager. For me, I was just so overwhelmed by the job, by what was required of me, that I didn't have a minute. I didn't have a moment to think about, oh, I really don't want to behave this way because that'll cause these negative things. Mm-hmm. Yeah, I was deep in it. Somebody would come at me with a problem and I'd just say, look, just do it this way. Don't just get it done. Come on, let's go. And well, you know, Deb is not the only one that has a foot in one of these bad boss behaviors in the book. For myself, I had more than one story for every single kind of bad boss in there. And it took me an awful long time to grow up and be a reasonably okay boss.
You know, I wonder if people on the call are thinking this. I know, so I also run a talent strategy company called SomethingNew, and we vet tens of thousands of people a year. And everyone's looking for a good culture, and I think everyone recognizes that so much of that is predicated on the boss that they're going to be working for. But is there anything that you could tell people that would help them to identify a bad boss during the interview process? Because I think it's really difficult. And it plays such a huge role in your satisfaction or dissatisfaction in the role.
That is a great question. Do you know what? We've never been asked that question before. Again, I would start with what's important to you. So what are the things that are part of your personal values? And then I would ask them really, you know, the same thing that we do on the other end, interviewing candidates. I would ask for some really specific questions. So if you're the kind of person like me, I love being creative. I love learning, making mistakes, learning from it, moving on, that type of thing. I would be asking in the interview questions about, you know, can you give me an example of what happens when things don't go well? As a boss, how do you support me? What's your view on mistakes? What's your view on appreciation? So I would ask for some real specific examples to show what happens based off the things that are important to you. But I think it's a great question. And I think more people, if you could do that, you'll get to know the real boss by, you know, getting through those fluffy answers that people give in interviews.
You're a lot more hopeful than I am on that score, Deb. For me, when I'm hiring, I always find it frustrating that I only get one hour to interview a candidate, maybe 2 if I'm lucky, but that's all I get. Anybody can put on company manners for an hour or 2, right? Anybody can behave themselves and not curse. Well, maybe not me, but you get the idea, right? And on that basis, when that person comes on board, they may not be the person I thought they were from that 1 hour. It's really, really difficult to see deep into somebody's soul in such a short period of time. And to Deb's point, it works exactly the same in the other direction. But if we think about an interview time slot, the company will ask me 50 or 55 minutes of questions and ask me the last 5 minutes, do I have any questions for them? My attitude on this whole thing is do the best you can in interviews. Ask the smartest questions that you can and try to weigh the answers and glean what you can from it. But don't put too much weight on what you see in an interview. Keep in mind that when an employee joins a company, they are usually in probation of some nature. Yep. But so is the company. And an awful lot of hiring managers or companies in general seem to forget that. They think that all the risk is with the candidate, but that's not the case. So when a new person comes on board, the company is beholden to make them as successful as possible. And the company really, in this case, is the manager that is dealing with that person, because that manager is the face of the company to that person. So probation
yeah.
works both ways.
So I'm going to be a rebel only because I know, Scott, you're all about shaking things up and doing things differently. As I've been hearing, as I've been hearing Ken talk, I'm thinking that we need to change things because, as a candidate, I should get more than 5 minutes. And if I only get 5 minutes, I should jump up and down and say, you know what, I want more time. A candidate should be able to ask for references and talk to some of the people who report to this boss and ask the tough questions to them. I think that the power needs to change when it comes to the whole recruitment process because, as we said, people leave because of bosses. And if you were a smart company, you would want to make sure that that fit is right.
And I agree with you. I think you can grab the power. You can grab the power by back channeling, and you can always find people on both sides of the equation, the employer and the employee, and you can have conversations. Obviously, if you have one conversation, it's a disgruntled, whatever, you may get a skewed answer, but I think that's one way to figure it out. What I love about the book is, so obviously you do a great job of detailing those 10 different types of bad bosses, but you give these 14 building blocks that make up a great boss. I guess talk about the ones that you think are the most important that attribute to becoming a great boss.
Good, Ken.
If you look at how the building blocks are shown in the book, there's a lighter patch up at the top and a darker patch at the bottom. The ones at the bottom, the 6 at the bottom, are the foundational building blocks. Without those, the ones at the top don't matter. If you can't get things like communication going, respect going, trust going, then none of the others are going to work. They'll be hollow. You might get the outline of one of the other kind of building blocks, but you're not going to get the substance of it. It's not going to have the full impact. So I would say focus on the 6 at the bottom, get those right, and the rest should be at least attainable, if not obvious. Deb?
Yeah, and the 6 at the bottom we call the 6-pack because they're the ones on the bottom, and they're the behaviors. And if you think about, at least for myself as a boss, we weren't really trained that much on these. So they're things like empathy and compassion, authenticity, vulnerability, respect, and trust. And if you think about any relationship that you've had with a boss or a personal relationship, if you don't have these things, as Ken said, they're absolutely positively going to fall apart. I mean, I know you had Claude Silver on this before. We interviewed Claude for this. You need the Claude Silvers of the world who are going to live and breathe these types of behaviors in order to be a great boss. As Ken said, before you start doing the actions, things like listening and appreciation. So yeah, they're all important, but again, they're important at different times, different situations, different people. But I think the 6-pack really will make the biggest difference.
I wanted to add, the rest of the layout of the building block model is not really quite so critical. It doesn't matter if you want to use development first and then appreciation later, or if you see what I mean. You use the block that's necessary at a particular moment in time. But those foundation, get those right first, and then the rest of them should fall into place.
How do you fix bad bosses?
Yeah. So
how do you reclaim them, reclamate them?
Again, we look at things a bit differently because a lot of times in organizations, and this might have happened to you guys before, you're doing a bad job, I'm going to throw you in a class. You've got low engagement scores, I'm going to send you to about 10 classes. So that is the last of our 3 A's, which is action. So that's all about going out and building those skills. But we really start at the beginning. We start with awareness and acceptance. So awareness is all about being aware that actually, you know what? we're all getting it wrong. As I said before, we're all human, aware of what happens when we get it wrong so that we can do something about it. And then acceptance, which is looking in the mirror and figuring out, okay, which of the things that I'm doing wrong, and then jump into action. I think if more people spent time on awareness and acceptance, we would be set up for success, our people and our businesses too.
Yeah.
We have to watch out for putting people into a box. We humans, we like to do this, whether it's racism or religion or just calling somebody a bad boss. We put them in a bad box. And then from then on, we don't have to think about the person. We don't have to think about the actions that they took or any of that. We've short-circuited all of it. They're just a bad boss. That's not really the ideal way to be looking at this sort of thing. As Deb said, we all have these bad boss behaviors to some degree in our lives. Every employee that we deal with, every situation that we deal with, every moment, every day of work that we deal with is going to be different and requires a different kind of response. And so even somebody who everybody looks at and goes, oh, that's a great boss over there, they're still making mistakes.
Yep.
And even the people who are bad bosses, they're still getting some things right, just not as much as people might hope. So the bottom line here is the way you fix a bad boss is pick one thing that bad boss is making a mistake on today and fix that today.
Yep.
And then tomorrow, next week, the next month, the next quarter, pick another one, work on that one. That's how we build ourselves up.
Yeah, my gymnastics coaches would always say, if you're 10% better, even 1% better every day, it's going to add up. So you're right.
Yep.
Those little bits add up. Oh, we also interviewed Coach Dana for the book. Thank you for that.
Nice.
See all these synergies with this group?
I know. I love it. I love it. If anyone ever wants to read a good reclamation, in terms of leadership, and which is really being a boss, a good friend of ours in the Outlier Project, Jason Redman, who is a Navy SEAL, he wrote a New York Times bestseller called The Trident, and he self-admitted he was a really shitty boss in the beginning. And when you're a shitty boss and you're in charge of Navy SEALs, like we're talking life and death type of stuff. And he completely turned it around. But it's a great example that, things aren't static. They don't stay one way forever. And if he was just, labeled as a bad boss or bad leader, we would have never had the Jason Redman, that turned that corner, long before his accident that he had. I'd love to ask you guys more questions, but these guys are going to get very, very angry with me if I do that. So we've got a ton of questions. Are you guys ready?
Let's go.
Hey, Scott, can you have, Debra, would you just repeat the 6-pack again? I'm just not sure that I got the complete list.
Sure. Empathy and compassion. Everything has a partner, sort of like Ken and I being partners. Our building blocks have partners. They work together. So empathy, compassion, authenticity, vulnerability, trust, or respect and trust. We can put a link to the website where there's all that information for free if anybody wants it as well.
Perfect. Thank you, guys. Our first question, we're going to go to Paul in Florida. Paul, fire away.
Oh my goodness, Deb and Ken, thank you so much for your time. This has been so insightful. I'm really curious for you both when it comes to one of the things that caught my eye about this conversation is Scott really kind of said, Deb, that you really know people at a really deep level. I'm curious, what is something that you would share with other leaders that you feel like you do that most people don't, that would be so transformational with navigating people? And then kind of a second question is, do you find that there's any correlation to that related to intuition?
I think what you said sort of goes directly back to the 6-pack as far as transformational. And if I look at my journey, and as Ken said, when we wrote the book, I had an example for every single example. And for me, transformational was to understand my behavior and understand my impact of my behavior on others. And if I could grasp that and understand that, then I could be a much better boss. And again, it goes back to the human side. I think it all, I can like learn. I'm very good. I told you I write books very predictable, very structured, but people don't think that way. So I think it's almost this free form dialogue, behavioral type approach to leadership has changed me. Ken, any thoughts?
Powerful. Thank you.
I was just going to say, Deb, you missed out on the intuition part.
Sorry.
And I think intuition does have a role to play here. It's in my mind, intuition is our subconscious talking to us, and we should be listening to it. We should be understanding what the back of our head is saying just as much as the front of our head.
My only caveat with that, and again, I've learned it the hard way, is to never assume that I know what my people are thinking. So it's okay to start out with that, but that's why one of the other building blocks is listening. And I think it's just, we went back and forth. Should listening be in the 6-pack? Because it's so critical, but you listen with empathy, you listen with compassion. So yeah, use your intuition, but then validate it. Absolutely. Again, in my story, I thought I was doing a great job, but I wasn't.
Colonel Heathman.
Thank you so much. I love this topic. And Lord knows I haven't been at my best throughout my career, and there are other times I have been at my best. And one interesting thing I've noticed, though, as a leader later in my career, leading large organizations, 3,000, 14,000, 36,000, we run these climate surveys every year. The Department of Defense puts these out, and they have about a 30% return rate. So not really good unless you as the leader really advertise the heck out of these things. But what's interesting when I read, all the responses, so 2,000 responses, I found it interesting how often the word toxicity comes up and how misused that word is. And there's a lot of people that think their boss is toxic because they hold them to higher standards than what they're actually used to. And I'm just curious, what do you think about that word, how often we throw that word around, and I think some of the misdiagnosis of it?
It's funny, Ken and I are saying that we want to write a book on the flip side for employees, because you are right. If I think about myself as a boss, yes, many times I was a bad boss, but other times I think you're 100% right. Our employees are not taking responsibility for it. And that, and I love your comment about toxicity. I only smile as an HR person, because how many times do people come to me like in exit interviews? It's a toxic culture. What the hell? I mean, it's like such a vague, it's one of those words that are, overused. It's like, Gen Z is used for the excuse of everything these days. So I think it's a really, that could be a whole conversation, but really, really valid points.
It's that whole idea of putting someone in a box again. It's laziness at the end of the day. The bosses that these people are labeling as toxic, they might have misbehaved. They might have made mistakes. I know as a boss, I've made plenty of mistakes. But it is sheer laziness to dump everybody in this exact same box and say, no, they're just all toxic. We should just put them, on a river and let them float out to sea. Well, how's that going to be any good at all to anybody? What we really need to be doing is try to figure out how to give some feedback, how to be constructive about it, how to find out what the boss is really trying to accomplish, and then support them in it. The more successful they can be, the more successful you as an employee can be.
That being said, there are toxic bosses. Let's be real. The title of the book came from a personal experience of mine where a bad boss got very close. I was probably at the time going through burnout. I was probably had some real severe problems, those types of things. So they are out there, but I genuinely believe it's the percentage. I was going to say something, Scott. One of the things that a great thing about having your partner write a book with you is, as an engineer, is I said, wouldn't it be great if we could have a survey that you answer these questions and it tells you which type of bad bosses you are, which are the ones that you need to focus on. So Ken created a free survey, completely free survey that's on our website to help. And then we're taking it to the next level. Actually, we're launching it next week, where it's a 360 survey. Because again, I get really angry when people point fingers and say, as Ken said, you're a bad boss. Well, what do I do about it? So we wanted to try to create something to, help these bosses be great, instead of just putting them in a box and pointing fingers. Poke some holes in the box and say, here's some light. This is what you can do to get out of that box.
It
Thank
sounds
you.
like a phenomenal tool. So you said next week that's available?
We're launching. Can you all come to Manchester next week? You can all
Sure.
be at Manchester because
I
we're
got nothing
launching it
going
at a
on.
conference. We'll see
Right.
you all there. We're having a wine and cheese party on the Wednesday night. You're all invited.
Awesome.
Jump on a plane.
Let's do it. I love that. Love it. To Scott's point, I hear toxic and I hear micromanager constantly. And when I drill down, oftentimes micromanaging, when I have them like give me an example and things like that, it's just that they were held accountable. They don't want to be held accountable. It's like, well, that's not really being a micromanager. That's kind of, what you're supposed to do. And it's hard to build a championship team if you don't have a bit of that. Anyway, Karen, we're going to you in New York.
Hi, as a former corporate America employee, this topic is extremely interesting to me. But I have a question, a two-part question. Ken, you said it took you a while to kind of grow up. I'd love to hear the process in which that happened. Like, I don't know if they're going into gory detail, but like, how did you know it was time to grow up, and what did you do to grow up? And my second question is this: you also mentioned it was a learned behavior, right? And so, how do you deal with people? Scott asked a question about, how do you fix a bad boss? But like, how do you talk to a person who's like, well, that's just the way I am, because it's a learned behavior, so that they think, well, that's just the way I am.
I said the gorier the better, Ken. Just so you know.
Do you know how hard
the-
it is for me to say, when are you going to grow up? Sorry, only because I'm married, so I can say that. Go ahead.
Wait, you said we weren't going to fight here.
Okay, sorry.
No, that was really a perceptive question on the end of that, Karen. Let me back into it. You started by asking, how did I know that it was time to grow up, and then how did I grow up? So I knew it was time to grow up because my background is software engineering, and I was incredibly impressed with myself. In university, I was the guy who never had to ask a question because everybody else was asking stupid questions. I already knew the answers to those, and I was moving on to the next questions. So I was incredibly impressed with myself. Not that I was all that great, I was just easily impressed. So we move on, and I wasn't horrible. I just was never the smartest guy in the room. The problem was I thought I was the smartest guy in the room, and that I needed to try to demonstrate and that's never ever a good look. Everybody knows at the time, except for me, that I wasn't the smartest guy in the room. At one point, I started to become successful, and I became a CTO of a startup. Now, anybody who knows a CTO or has been a CTO, I'm going to do this, a CTO in a startup. Because basically, I was a glorified tech lead, but I had the title, and therefore I had the big ego, and that was one of the roots of my problems at the time. When that company flamed out spectacularly, and it did, I did an awful lot of soul searching, and I realized I was getting it deeply wrong. I was doing something horribly, horribly wrong. But at the time, all I knew was the tech side of things and not the people side of things. So this is in the early 2000s. So I decided that's it. People are too hard. I'm going to be a software developer for the rest of my life. I'm going to stay in a dark closet and never leave my keyboard, and that's going to be that. Life, of course, never lets you do whatever the thing you think you're going to be doing for the rest of your life. We ended up adopting children. And quite literally, I had to grow up and not be the selfish little so-and-so that I was in the early 2000s, because now I had these two little souls looking at me going, well, Dad, I'm sick. I need food. My leg hurts. They were making fun of me. What are we going to do about it? I was lucky enough at the time, Deb's job was bigger than mine, so I became the stay-at-home dad. So in raising them, they raised me at the same time. When I finally was able to return to the workforce, I had a completely different attitude about how things were. I really understood that I wasn't the sharpest tool in the shed. I really wasn't the smartest guy in any room. I finally realized the power of being able to admit openly in public and in front of everybody, you know what? I don't know. What do you think the answer to that one is? I always thought of that as my superpower, being able to say out loud in front of God and everybody, I don't know. What do you think? As soon as I could do that, I started to progress again. As soon as I could do that, I started to get on better with the people around me. Lo and behold, who knew? Dropping the ego was really, really key for me. In being married to Deb all this time, she saw me go on this journey. When she saw me go back in the office, she kept encouraging me, you're doing okay. Why don't you try being a manager? And all I could think about was, back in the day, it was like herding cats. It was just painful. I was so embarrassed how badly I had done it. But all of a sudden, this time, it wasn't about me. It wasn't about my ego. It wasn't even about the technology. It was about the people. And just like when I got to watch my kids grow and get better at life and learn a lesson and get better at life and keep on growing, the pleasure, the joy, the satisfaction that gave me was a whole different level than when I had succeeded myself. And that same metric worked for me in the workplace. I could watch my people grow. I could watch my people succeed and become better in themselves. And then finally, when I I became a senior engineering manager, and I promoted somebody to be an engineering manager. And I watched him grow his own people and support his own people and turn them into better employees and better eventual managers. I can't begin to tell you how much joy that brought to me, right? So that was kind of my journey from soup to nuts, really. And then the second part of your question, sorry, I talked too long, Karen. What was the second part of your question?
Actually, do you mind if I jump in for the second part? Because I love your question for the second part.
Oh, now I
Is that
can't
okay?
wait.
Yeah. No, it's a bit about learned behavior. And as an HR person, I have to train managers all the time. And they're like, it's just who I am. I'm not going to change. Exactly what you said, Karen. And I hear it over and over again. And I push back all the time, because we can change if we want to change. I am a micromanager. Who is the person on this call who keeps saying, Ken, Debra, whatever? Because we just said, okay, you're a micromanager. You be in charge of who's going to answer the questions. But you learn how to adapt. You learn how to do things better, to like smooth things out. So I will always be a micromanager, but I can learn to do it better so it's not impacting people's lives negatively. So I think it's a really good point, and I would really push back with people on that one. If you want to be a manager and you want to be great, you need to take responsibility for not changing who you are, but adapting it.
And if you're the employee in that situation where the boss goes, that's just who I am, deal with it. You really face a choice. You can work hard. You can do your best to communicate. You can try to support them. You can reach out to them and you can go above and beyond in all directions. But you cannot change someone else's behavior. If they choose that path and they choose to be steadfast in stubbornness and not listening and not supporting, just assuming that everyone else is going to bend to their will, maybe it's time to find a new situation. Jobs don't really have to be forever.
That was
Before
amazing.
we move on to our next question, I just wanted to say a huge congratulations to somebody on the call who I think is one of the best leaders out there, and that's Sonny, who just took a job as the CEO of Cadre Hospice. So, Sonny, congrats. You are a phenomenal leader, and I am so excited for you on your next chapter. So excited.
That is super kind of you. Thank you so much, Scott. I appreciate you.
So, Sunny, I'm sure you
Absolutely.
don't need the book, but as a congratulations from us, if you send us your address, we'll send you a copy of it as a
Oh,
congratulations.
I'd love to. I'd love to. I am all about vulnerability and sharing all the really dumb decisions we made early in leadership in service of everyone getting better in the leadership space.
Yeah, I think it's such an important point, and that's why every time we do a talk, every chapter of the book shares genuine, real examples, because I believe that if I can put myself out there and show people that I'm human, that they'll embrace it, they'll accept it, they'll admit it even better. If we try to pretend we're perfect, the world's never going to change.
And that then creates ripples of permission for everyone else to show up the same way.
I love it. Ripples
I would
of
love
permission.
that. Thank you guys. I appreciate that.
Where were you when we were writing our book? We would have quoted you there.
Sunny is amazing. And if you want to read a great post, I think it was a couple days ago when she announced that she was, moving on to a new chapter of her life and taking the job as the CEO. And I just think, she put the stake in the ground for what was going to be important in this new organization. And it's like people. It's and high standards and just phenomenal. But anyway, I digress. Scott Raven, you're up.
Thank you. Ken, Debra is somebody who survived a couple of narcissists, including one who indirectly sent him to the hospital. I appreciate this chat. I'll put it that way. Lack of self-awareness is the number one driver of poor leadership. And a key element of that, in my humble opinion, is how we act in normal situations versus stress situations, whether it be a momentary crisis, a good boss that gets reorganized under a bad boss, or here comes a layoff, so everybody's playing Game of Thrones. Question, did you explore how to improve your boss ability under stressful situations? And then are there keys that can be acted upon?
I think it's a really great question. We didn't specifically talk about it. I do share one story in the book about how I got promoted and all of a sudden was very, very stressed. And some of my bad boss behaviors came out, ones I didn't even know that I had. And I talk about how I dealt with it, which, maybe we can partner on a blog post on this one. Because the way that I dealt with this is I brought out authenticity and vulnerability. And I went to my people and I explained to them that my alter ego, whose name is Debbie, actually, that my alter ego was going to be coming out when I was stressed. And what could we do to handle her when she came out? So they made a sign that said Debbie is in the office. And then every time Debbie came out, I would put that sign on the door. And I think the point of that story is that we need to be honest with our people and admit that during stress, we're not going to be perfect and that we need them to understand it, but also to call us out and let us know what we need to do. So again, it goes back to that shared responsibility. Really good question. There needs to be a blog on that.
And the ability of a boss to say, yeah, I didn't get it right this time. I'm going to do better next time. I do think there's a pervasive effort across all of industry, in all walks of life, where people are trying to eliminate all risk. You can't fire me, you can't lay me off, you can't this, that, the other, because I'm perfect. I have no flaws. I got a great review. I think most of us would understand that isn't really how it works anymore. No matter what you did yesterday, if the business can't afford you, the business is going to let you go, right? You can't eliminate risk. You can only handle it when something goes wrong. And I think a measure of a boss, a measure of an organization, a measure of an employee is, what do you do when it goes wrong?
Well said, and I appreciate that, Ken, in terms of, how you're truly judged is when your back's against the wall, what do you do? So well said, and look forward to that blog on the subject.
I was just going to say, I wrote a book that came out right before the pandemic, which was on company values. And then during the pandemic, I wrote 30 stories about how companies handled the pandemic, living through their values. And to me, the pandemic was a huge test to organizations and how they treated people and customers. And a lot of people decided at that point in time, you know what, I either really want to stay with them because they've done a great job, or actually, I do not like the way they treated me in these challenging times and I'm leaving. So sort of related to stress.
Awesome. I just saw a great comment in the comments from one of our brand new members, Denise Brown, who, if you do not know Denise yet, you've got to get to know her. She is a trip and smart as could be, just crazy, crazy bright. So we're going to try to cram in 3 questions in 3 minutes. I don't know if that's possible, but we've got Bruce, then we've got Courtney, and then we would end with Kimberly. So let's try to get these 3 in the 3 minutes we've got left.
Great. Debra and Ken, thank you so much. Really have appreciated such insightful knowledge that you've shared. So I've been writing about the workplace for most of my career as a journalist with a focus on benefits and compensation. I'm wondering to what extent the two of you have seen an increasing emphasis on culture for candidates, that they're wanting culture as much as they want benefits and comp.
I'm going to take this only because you and I need to speak offline. I spent over 20 years as a global reward leader. So we could talk for a very long time about comp and benefits, and it has a sweet spot. So it absolutely has an important role to play when it comes to culture, because going back to what I said about values, it talks about how your company treats you, how they feel about you, how they're going to pay you and give you benefits. So yeah, let's talk offline. I'd love it.
You got it.
Courtney, you're up.
Hi, Denise and Ken. Thank you so much. You brought knowing that they have to be self-aware and accept that they have these shortcomings, which I believe we all have shortcomings in our own way. You have a questionnaire available. Is that for the leader to take themselves, or is this a questionnaire we can give to our team to provide the assessment, then we can give to the leader?
Right now, the tool that's out there, the free assessment, is a self-assessment. It's for the manager to step through the questions, and at the end, find out the bad boss behaviors they've admitted to, and get a list of building blocks that they might want to focus on to improve. Now, the tool that we're going to be releasing in the coming weeks is the other side of the coin. It's what the employees are actually seeing. Now, self-evaluation is really, really hard. It's hard to be objective about, precious little me. Really, really hard. And so we knew that although that was a useful tool, we needed the 360 feedback tool as well.
Yeah, just
and so is there?
Oh, sorry. Go ahead.
No. I'm just curious if you know of a tool that is available that you can provide to your employees to make that assessment, then to provide to leadership.
There's lots of great engagement surveys out there.
Mm-hmm.
And they ask the questions at a really high level. So are your employees engaged based off of a couple variables? So we're not trying to replace that at all. This sort of digs a bit deeper and helps, like if you're an unappreciator, it'll help you understand why. So one of the results we just saw the other day was that they said that they were an unappreciator, not that they don't know how to give it, but they're not giving it frequently enough. So it digs a bit deeper. So again, we can talk offline if you've got more questions.
Sure.
I was just going to say, Deb, we need to reach out to Courtney offline.
Thank you.
Ken and Deb, can we sneak in one more question?
Sure.
Yeah, you're cutting in. It's almost 5 o'clock, so it's wine time for us. You guys, still have to work.
Hey, you can drink wine on these calls. That's totally allowed.
Do you think it's coffee in here?
Yeah, right. I mean, you weren't fooling me for 1 second. Kimberly, you're a cleanup hitter. Did we lose Kimberly?
She did. She had to leave early, and she said she sent you LinkedIn connection requests because she wants to talk to you about stress response for leaders. Kimberly Arnold.
Cool.
She's great.
We'll look forward to that.
Smart cookie. Guys, this hour flew by. I feel like we just got on the call and could talk for the rest of the day. Thank you guys so much. I know it's getting to the end of the day there for you guys.
Can I say one more thing? Only because
Yeah.
I saw Veronica there. Veronica, we dedicated this book to our children because we want a world where they don't have bad bosses and they're great bosses themselves.
I love that.
Sorry, I saw the picture. It made me think of that.
I love that. Sorry, that's why my video kept going in and out and off and whatever, because I was picking up bananas and popcorn and, falling children off of stools. So
it happens. It happens.
Sorry, Scott.
Veronica runs a company called Hoodies and Wine. Greatest name of all time.
Very cool.
Thank you guys so much. You wrote another epic book. Hopefully you guys collaborate on another. But I would highly recommend that everybody pick this one up. It's just so good. The format is so easy. It's just, there's a lot of books out there. You can't read them all. This is one I would highly encourage everybody to grab a copy of, because I know that you're going to enjoy it. So thank you guys so much. I so appreciate it, Deb and Ken.
I was going to say the audiobook's coming out soon. And if you ever do an audiobook, one tip, do not drink Diet Coke before you record because your stomach makes noises. I never knew that before. There you go.
Interesting. I thought you were going to say burping or something like that.
You're burping too, but there you go. Yeah.
Yeah, whatever. It keeps it real. It's better that way. Thank you guys. We'll catch up again soon, but I appreciate you guys as always.
Thank you, Scott, and thank you everybody for the good questions.